In May of 2015, detectives with Indiana's South Bend Police Department were under intense pressure. A local young woman had vanished without a trace, and her disappearance had since captured widespread public attention. While this had initially helped to generate a ton of tips, none of these had panned out. In fact, the truth was that after nearly 6 weeks, police had little to show for their efforts other than a wild goose chase. As luck would have it, though, investigators were about to stumble across something that would completely change the way that they looked at the case. It came in the form of a tiny detail. Now, on its own, this detail was incredibly minor, something that could have easily been overlooked. However, as soon as authorities noticed it and began to probe further, it would reveal a disturbing truth that no one was prepared for. On the afternoon of April 14th, 2015, authorities with Indiana's South Bend Police Department received a frantic call from a woman named Susana Lagunas. She said that she was calling because she was extremely worried about her niece, 22-year-old Alma Del Real. No one had seen or heard from her in more than 48 hours. Susana explained that she had last spoken to Alma shortly before the weekend, on Friday, April 10th. Alma had called her that morning and suggested that they go for coffee on her lunch break. Deciding that she would save them both some money, Susana brewed coffee at home instead and had driven it over to the local Wells Fargo bank where her niece worked as a teller. Alma was usually pretty busy on the weekends, so Susana hadn't expected to hear from her for a couple of days. However, when Monday arrived and Alma started missing work, she was immediately concerned. Susana told police that this kind of behavior was extremely out of character for her niece. Alma was typically very responsible and dependable. In fact, she had just received a promotion at the bank. It was another reason that Susana said she thought her niece might be in some kind of trouble. She had tried contacting Alma again and again, though she said that all of these attempts were unsuccessful. Alma was originally from Mexico, but she had moved to the United States when she was just 10 years old. It had been a difficult decision, as her parents weren't able to come with her, but luckily, she had plenty of family who were there to serve as a base of love and support. In addition to her aunt, Alma had been raised by her grandparents. Both inside and outside of school, Alma was a hard worker. She had balanced multiple jobs since the time when she was 15. Part of this was to help her family make ends meet. But those who knew Alma also said that there was a drive within her. She was career-oriented and determined to try and get ahead in life. Initially, Alma thought she wanted to be an actress. She was particularly interested in live theater and took part in a number of stage productions while she was still in high school. However, she would eventually find her true passion in a more behind-the-scenes part of the entertainment industry, when she started to learn about the roles of professional hair and makeup people. In the meantime, she saved up money and put herself through college to make sure she had the best career prospects possible. But her dream was to eventually become a professional makeup artist. No matter how much effort she put into achieving her goals, though, Alma always made time for family and friends. Her natural charisma and outgoing personality drew people in, but it was her kindness and consideration for others that was really at the core of who she was. Being that Alma was so popular, it turned out that her aunt was far from the only person who had been trying to get in contact with her. A bunch of other family members and friends hadn't received responses to their numerous calls, voicemails, and texts either. And then there was Alma's social media accounts. She posted constantly to Facebook, Snapchat, and other platforms. But for more than 2 days now, her accounts had been completely inactive. When police took a look at these accounts, they quickly understood what Alma's family was talking about. She had been very active right up until the morning of Sunday, April 12th. Then suddenly, everything had gone silent. This was also the same time that the 22-year-old had last been heard from. Like most weekends, she had gone out with friends that Saturday night. They said that when they had last seen her, Alma had been on her way home. Or so they thought. Despite the concerns for Alma's safety, At this point, police didn't feel they had enough to show that a crime had been committed. There was no actual evidence of foul play, so they had to consider the possibility that she had gone missing of her own free will, however unlikely this seemed to her friends and family. Still, detectives conducted a search of her house, hoping to find something that might definitively prove one way or another what had happened. When authorities arrived at the property, they found the place locked, with no signs of forced entry. They encountered a similar situation inside. Nothing was obviously out of place, and there were no indications of a struggle. Alma's bedroom also appeared to be just the way she usually left it. The room was packed with clothes, makeup, and accessories, and Alma's bank cards and ID were there as well. The only things that appeared to be missing were her purse and cell phone. The final detail that police took note of in the room was the fact that Alma's bed was made. This initially wasn't all that important. However, it would become a lot more significant when authorities were contacted by one other person about the 22-year-old's disappearance. This person was a friend and co-worker of Alma's named Crystal, and what she shared with detectives was far and away the most unsettling information they had received yet. Crystal said that on Sunday morning, so just hours after Alma was thought to have arrived home from her night out, she went by Alma's house to pick her up for a trip that they had planned. They were supposed to drive up to Chicago together to attend a beauty and cosmetics trade conference. However, when Crystal arrived at Alma's house that day, there was no answer at the door. According to Crystal, this was a plan that had been set in stone ages ago, and something that Alma had been looking forward to for weeks. In fact, she was preparing to start selling a line of makeup, so there were contacts at the trade show that she was scheduled to meet with. It wasn't the kind of thing that she would have simply blown off. Circling back to Alma's bedroom, Crystal's information hinted at an eerie possibility. Maybe the reason her bed was made when police conducted their search was actually because it hadn't been slept in at all. If this was true, it was the best proof yet that authorities had that something might be seriously wrong. However, in order to be sure, detectives would have to get a better idea of the exact timeline leading up to Alma's disappearance. Following their initial conversations with Alma's friends and family members, South Bend police had a rough idea of what had happened before and after the 22-year-old went missing. The next step was to really drill down into these events, both to establish a concrete timeline and to figure out any gaps that might exist. The end of the timeline was the most straightforward. Thanks to Crystal, investigators knew that Alma was definitely missing by the morning of Sunday, April 12th. Crystal had driven to Alma's home on Ewing Avenue around 9:30. The house was locked when she arrived, and she couldn't get an answer despite ringing the doorbell and knocking on the front door as well as several of the windows. Authorities decided to start their timeline from the previous day, April 11th, since they knew that this is when Alma had last been seen by the greatest number of people. That afternoon, Alma had stopped by the home of another one of her aunts, Alma Del Real. Maribel told police that they had talked for a bit about nothing in particular, and that Alma had showered there before heading out. She was pretty sure that she went back to her own house, though she couldn't say for sure. From here, nothing much happened until about 9 p.m., when Alma had met up with several of her friends. The group were seen together at Brothers Bar and Grill, located in South Bend's Eddy Street Commons neighborhood, about 4 miles north of Alma's home. Alma and her friends left Brothers Bar shortly after 1 a.m., making their way a couple of miles south to a club called Studio Rumba 305. Witnesses recalled seeing them arrive there at approximately 1:30. The group was on the dance floor for a little under 2 hours and had wrapped up their night at 3:20 when they decided to go their separate ways. After leaving the club, Alma got a ride home with her friend, 24-year-old Alberto Cruz. She only lived about a mile away, so she had been dropped off somewhere around 3:30 a.m. This was where the biggest gap in the timeline existed. After Alberto, no one had seen Alma, and it was 6 more hours before Crystal arrived to try and pick her up. Since Alberto was the last person to see Alma before she went missing, he was an obvious person of interest. Police brought him in for questioning, asking him to tell them everything he could about the morning of April 12th. Alberto said that he dropped Alma off in his red pickup truck right around 3:30. He said he asked her if she wanted him to walk her to the door, but she said that she was okay. Alberto said that that was fine with him because he was pretty tired anyway and he was ready to go to bed. He drove away right after Alma got out and admitted that he hadn't even waited to see if she got in the door. This immediately caught the attention of detectives, especially because of what Alberto said next. He explained that a few minutes after leaving, he received a FaceTime call from Alma. Alberto said that at the time he believed Alma wanted to go and get food. By this point, he just wanted to get home, so he ignored the call. Now he wondered if maybe that had been an awful mistake. Alberto was extremely forthcoming during their conversation. However, detectives weren't just going to take him at his word. They checked his cell phone records, though everything appeared to line up with what he had told them. While Alberto didn't seem to be involved in Alma's disappearance, his account was nonetheless important, especially the fact that he hadn't seen the 22-year-old make it safely inside when he dropped her off. In the minds of investigators, this raised two possibilities. Maybe Alma had been followed home and attacked on her doorstep, or perhaps someone had been waiting for her inside the house. Exploring these theories further, authorities questioned a number of staff and customers at both of the locations where Alma and her friends had been hanging out on the night of her disappearance. They asked them if they had seen anything or anyone unusual. As it happened, plenty of people remembered seeing Alma that night, particularly at Studio Rumba 305. According to sources we came across, she actually used to work at the club, so a number of the staff members, including the owner, knew her by name. One bouncer who was working there later stated in an interview with local media that he was a little concerned for Alma when she arrived because he could tell that she had been drinking heavily. However, she was with her friends, so she appeared to be fine. Most of the other people who had seen Alma recalled that she was pretty popular, and they had seen quite a few guys trying to talk to her, dance with her, and buy her drinks. However, no one had recalled seeing anything that set off red flags. No one had been threatening or aggressive towards her, and no one was following her as far as witnesses could tell. Police did a deep dive into Alma's social media accounts, but unfortunately, this too came up empty. There wasn't anything there that seemed to be related to her disappearance. When detectives looked at the 22-year-old's financial records, though, they found another troubling sign. There had been no activity on her accounts since the time that she went missing. While authorities were hitting dead ends in their investigation, Alma's family and friends were doing whatever they could to make sure the case was getting as much attention as possible. They could feel crucial time slipping away, and they knew that the best way to generate new leads was to garner public support. As it turned out, Alma's loved ones were incredibly successful at rallying the community behind them. They had marches, mobilized large groups of volunteers to conduct searches, and raised money for a reward. They also created a Facebook page that served both as a place to submit new information, as well as a hub where new updates would be released. All of this helped to increase the visibility of the case, which in turn generated more media coverage, amplifying things further. Businesses joined in as well. At one point, a local pizzeria called Marco's was including Alma's missing persons flyer with every delivery order, and the local Kroger's grocery store was handing them out to all of their customers. Pretty soon, all of these efforts started to pay off, and a wave of new leads and tips started coming in. It wouldn't take long before one of them in particular would catch the attention of police. After several weeks of nothing but dead ends, detectives with the South Bend Police Department received a call from a man who said he had information about the Alma Del Real case. What he shared was incredibly disturbing. The man stated that he had reason to believe that Alma had been the victim of human trafficking. When asked for further details, the man said that he had been out at a local Kmart when he had overheard 5 other men discussing the 22-year-old's disappearance. One of these men had said that their brother had kidnapped Alma and sold her to people involved in the illegal sex trade. According to these men, she was now being held captive somewhere in Ohio, and one of them actually claimed to have seen her at the place where she was now being kept. Understandably, this was a horrifying development, and one that caught police completely off guard. Still, the tip appeared to be credible, so they immediately began investigating further. Since the allegations involved human trafficking over state lines, the FBI was brought in to assist South Bend detectives. Luckily, the tipster actually knew one of the 5 suspects and handed this information over to authorities. Using this, they were able to comb through the man's social media accounts to identify the others. Once investigators had their names, they subpoenaed their cell phone records. Unfortunately, these showed that none of the men had been to Ohio either before or after Alma went missing. In fact, they hadn't even left the South Bend area. Authorities were getting ready to write off the tipster's information entirely. However, before they could do so, another lead came in that was unnervingly similar in nature. It was also far more specific. This witness said that they had seen Alma at a hotel in suburban Chicago. At the time, she was with a man who appeared to be trying to keep her out of sight, and it looked like she might have been with him against her will. Adding further credibility to the new tip was the fact that this particular hotel was known in the area for being popular with sex workers. Knowing that they might only have a short window to act before Alma could be moved again, the FBI immediately went to the hotel and obtained its surveillance footage. They also reached out to local law enforcement to assist with a possible arrest. After arriving in the area, the FBI met with a local detective who said that not only were they aware of the tip about the woman who was possibly in danger, they had already been sent to investigate. They had responded to the hotel after receiving a disturbance call. When the FBI showed the detective Alma's picture, he said, "Oh yeah, this looks just like the woman from the report." However, he immediately followed this up with some crushing news. The woman he spoke with was not Alma Del Real. He was absolutely positive about this because he actually knew the woman at the hotel. She was a local runaway who he was very familiar with, and she was now safe. This whole thing had been a massive coincidence. While authorities were thankful in the sense that the detective had saved them a bunch of time chasing down a dead-end theory, unfortunately, this left the case in a pretty tough spot. They were now more than 4 weeks in with no real evidence and with an ever-dwindling supply of witnesses and leads. Out of desperation, South Bend police decided that they needed to essentially begin their investigation from scratch. And as far as they were concerned, there was really only one place to start. Convinced that there had to be something they could find to move their case forward, when South Bend detectives went back to square one, their top priority became searching for anything that they might have overlooked the first time. Part of this process was re-interviewing witnesses, including the last person to see Alma, her friend, 24-year-old Alberto Cruz. Just like every other time they spoke with him, Alberto was extremely cooperative when he was brought back in. By this point, he had sat down with investigators several times, and in each discussion, he had complied with any request that was made of him, even if he sometimes seemed a little bit annoyed or put out by the repetition of it all.
Hey Alberto, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful.
You alright?
Yeah, I'm good.
You were the last person to be with her, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first person that we start with.
However, on this particular day, Alberto did something that he had never done before. He changed a detail in his story about the morning of April 12th. In every telling up until this point, Alberto had always insisted when he received the FaceTime call from Alma's phone after dropping her off, he had ignored it because he was tired and he thought she wanted food. Now though, for some inexplicable reason, he said that he didn't hear the call. He said he probably missed it because his radio was turned up too loud. While this could have been seen as an innocuous change, something about it rubbed detectives the wrong way. It also made less sense than his previous explanation. If he had deliberately ignored the call because he was pretty sure what Alma wanted, then it made sense why he hadn't called her back. But if he had just missed the call, why hadn't he ever phoned Alma back to see what she wanted? At this point, detectives asked Alberto to take a polygraph test. They also asked him if they could do a more thorough scan of his cell phone. After a little bit of hesitancy, he agreed to both.
You mind if they look at your phone again? Is that a problem?
They said they'd look through my phone.
I'd like to go through it. Is that okay?
I mean,
I'll give it right back to you.
I don't mind, but for what reason?
Just to do a complete scan of your phone.
Okay, no, go through my phone, that's fine.
The results of the polygraph suggested that Alberto was trying to be deceitful in his answers to detectives. However, this was nothing compared to the information revealed by the scan of his cell phone. As a side note, you might be wondering what was different about this search of Alberto's phone compared to the first one that authorities did. Unfortunately, none of the sources we came across talked about this in any detail. Though, reading between the lines, it seems that this time they focused far more on his geolocation data. This was apparently obtained from the Location Services app on his phone. Of course, take what we're saying with a grain of salt, as we don't actually know for sure. Anyway, when detectives looked at this data, it showed that Alberto had not immediately left Alma's house after dropping her off on April 12th, as he had initially claimed. In fact, his phone placed him at the residence for more than 2 hours. When he finally left the house at around 5:30 a.m., his phone further showed that he had not gone home. Instead, he had driven about 40 miles south to a rural area near the town of Culver. He had stayed here for another hour or so before finally returning home. When detectives brought Alberto back in for questioning and confronted him with this new information, he immediately became defensive. He attempted to stick to his story, even as it began to completely crumble under scrutiny.
What do you want me to tell you?
When we left Monday, I believed every word you told me.
But now you don't.
But then, when we started looking at the phone stuff, the records show you're somewhere else. How can I believe you?
I'm telling you the honest truth.
Not when there's results. The phone can't lie. It can't lie. Who can lie? People can lie.
Despite his numerous attempts to convince police that his story was true, Alberto eventually seemed to realize that this was not going to get him anywhere. That's when things took a strange turn. Alberto said that he was ready to tell the truth, one that involved Mexican drug cartels and a terrifying early morning ambush. Alberto said that someone in Alma's family owed money to a cartel, and that when he dropped her off on April 12th, there were people there waiting for them. They grabbed Alma and then told him to leave unless he wanted to end up dead as well. Unlike Alberto's first story, this new version of events changed the more that he tried to explain the details. At first, the kidnappers were actual cartel members, then they were gang members from the Latin Kings who were working for the cartel. At one point, he said he fled the scene after being threatened. Later, he claimed that the attackers had actually stolen his truck and cell phone when they abducted Alma. In this version of the story, he had walked home only to find his truck parked down the street from his house later that morning, abandoned with his phone inside. The only thing that stayed consistent was that none of this was his fault.
I had nothing to do with it. Nothing.
I can't believe that, though. I can't. Because there's evidence showing different.
Okay, prove it that I did something.
I guess I have to.
Everybody's blaming me.
You gotta want this to be over with. I can help you get it over with.
You're asking me to tell you something that I don't know nothing about.
This whole situation apparently went on for several hours, but no matter how hard authorities pushed, they couldn't get him to offer any kind of confession. That was, until during a break, when a veteran member of the detective team came up with an idea. He suggested just asking Alberto if he knew where Alma's body was and if he could take them there. Unbelievably, this seemingly straightforward approach worked. Alberto agreed that if they could get out of there and go for a ride, that he would take authorities to the place where Alma was hidden. Sure enough, as detectives began driving with Alberto and following his directions, they realized that they were following the exact same route as the one that they had recovered from his cell phone data. They continued south for about 40 miles until they arrived at a remote section of woodland just off of Queen Road in Indiana State Route 10. This is where Alberto told them to stop. Chillingly, he then pointed out the window, saying, "She's out there." After trudging through the forested area for some time, authorities stumbled across the thing that they had most been dreading. About 20 to 30 yards away from the road were human remains. They were lying face down in a particularly thick and marshy area. In an interview we came across, one of the investigators there that day described the scene as one of the top 2 or 3 worst bodies he'd seen in his career. The entire time this was playing out, Alberto Cruz was reportedly sitting in the back of a police squad car, sobbing. Though the remains were visually unrecognizable, the horrifying truth was confirmed following an autopsy. These were the remains of Alma Del Real. Alberto Cruz was arrested and charged with Alma's murder. However, even after all of this, he refused to plead guilty or accept responsibility. Understandably, the revelation about what had happened was a terrible blow to Alma's family and friends. Not just because of the fact that she had been murdered, but because of who was responsible. You see, Alberto hadn't just been putting on a show for police when he pretended to be concerned and cooperative. Disturbingly, he had helped out with a number of the search efforts for Alma, and at one point had even gone so far as to meet with her family and tell them that he promised they were going to find her. They had believed Alberto and truly thought he was her friend. At trial, Alberto and his defense trotted out one final excuse for what had happened. This time, he went as far as to admit that he had caused Alma's death, though once again attempted to diminish his responsibility. Alberto claimed that on the morning of April 12th, Alma had invited him inside when he dropped her off. Once there, they had engaged in a consensual, intimate encounter. However, this had taken an abrupt turn when Alma tried to blackmail him. He said that she threatened to tell his girlfriend, and that a fight had started between them. Things got physical, Alma fell to the ground, and she hit her head. Alberto stated that he knew she was probably going to die, so he panicked, strangled her to prevent her from suffering, and then tried to cover everything up. Prosecutors argued that there was no way this story could have been true. While Alma's remains were too badly decomposed to definitively prove a cause of death, one thing that was highly unlikely was that she had suffered fatal trauma to the head. This was because there were no signs of damage to her skull. Instead, prosecutors argued that Alberto Cruz had been obsessed with Alma. By this time, they had obtained new statements from witnesses who said that he appeared to follow her around and harbored romantic feelings for her. They suspected that Alberto knew his feelings weren't returned, so on the morning of April 12th, he tried to take advantage of Alma while she was drunk. He assaulted her, but she fought back, and he strangled her so she wouldn't be able to tell anyone what had happened. It took the jury less than 90 minutes to side with the prosecution, and in May of 2016, Alberto Cruz was found guilty of murder. A month later, he was sentenced to 60 years in prison. At the time of this recording, he remains incarcerated at the Indiana State Prison, with online records indicating that his earliest possible release date is May 18th, 2060. I don't think it'll come as a surprise to anyone watching that the thing that got me most about this case was the betrayal. Alma Del Real was an extremely promising young woman with her whole life ahead of her, but she was robbed of everything, all because she made the innocent decision to accept a ride home from a person who was supposed to be a trusted friend. As if this weren't horrifying enough, Alberto Cruz continued to take advantage of people's trust after committing the crime. The fact that he was able to look her family in the eye and pretend like he had no idea what happened is frankly one of the most unsettling things I have ever heard. What's most amazing to me, though, is that even after everything, it appears that Alma's family has still come out of all of this able to see the good in people. Not only in their appreciation of the many community members who came out to help them in their time of need, but also in their ability to show compassion for the other people affected by this tragedy. One of the things that struck me the most was a comment made by Susanna in an interview when talking about the trial. She said that the hardest part wasn't hearing what had happened to her niece. It was seeing the reactions of Alberto's family and understanding the sense of loss that they were also experiencing. If nothing else, I think that speaks volumes about the kind of people Alma's family are, and indeed, the kind of person Alma probably was as well. I sincerely hope that in the years since, they have found some semblance of peace after this terrible tragedy. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you'd consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.